1999, I got a phone call from the managing editor of the Environment News Service, whom I worked for in the Gulf. And he said, please check out a story of a man named William Wallace, just over the border in Washington State, who lives in eastern Washington, very remote region. He lives in a cabin with his wife. And Mr. Wallace has been talking about large airplanes overflying his house back and forth, spraying plumes that look like contrails, the condensation trails we're all used to seeing. But unlike these ice crystal trails that form in the hot engines of jet aircraft above 33,000 feet, according to the U.S. military and Canadian aviation authorities, unlike these condensation trails that linger usually, not always, but almost always, for about 30 to 45 seconds. You see the pencil-thin trail a short distance behind the aircraft, disappearing like the wake behind a boat. Unlike these trails, the trails that William Wallace and his wife Anne were seeing were broad white plumes. They lingered for hours. And as these aircraft began crisscrossing each other and forming a grid, these plumes gathered together and took a clear blue sky and made it opaque, hazy, milky. Temperatures dropped. His animals sickened, his dogs died, his plants sickened, his wife became very ill. And when I went on Art Bell for the first time and used William Wallace's name with his permission, he was again visited for the third time by aircraft who sprayed their property. In fact, that night when I finished my first Art Bell show, I was living in a small cabin in the hills outside of Chemainus. And I came outside about 3:30 in the morning, very wired from this very intense presentation. Took a breath of air, beautiful night, stars, just started to relax, and I froze. Giant X right over the cabin. Now, I'm not paranoid or anything, but when they started flying parallel patterns down the ridge right across from me over the next few weeks, I began to wonder if maybe some people were sensitive about having this story exposed. Let's have a quick look at what we're talking about, because pictures are always better than words. I don't know about you, but people continually tell me, oh, these are normal contrails, these are normal aircraft patterns, and I'm here to tell you tonight that if a commercial airline pilot pulled this stunt, they would lose their license. Yeah. These pictures were taken very recently over Nevada, Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, an international flight center, and towards the end, Vancouver on Monday of this week. Legal spacing for commercial airliners is 3 miles. I believe the X's are for satellite identification. Don't worry, it's just normal airline traffic. And if you wait a few minutes, you'll watch and see these chemtrails start to spread out as they're doing here. And if you have ignored the phenomena for an hour and happen to look up, you'll probably think it's just cloud. But fog forms at ground level. It doesn't form at 20,000 feet. But something else was going on. Something else down here on the ground. Last winter, in this city, in Victoria, in London, Ontario, in Toronto, Edmonton, cities across Canada, we saw an epidemic of influenza-like illnesses. That epidemic was also right across the United States and England. At Peterborough, the emergency room took 307 acute care patients in one day. In England, refrigerator trucks were hired to haul the dead bodies away. This is from the BBC, by the way. This is an exact repeat of the previous winter, when refrigerator trucks were pushed into service as morgues in England. And we had 12 straight weeks of what the Centers for Disease Control called an epidemic of influenza-like illness and pneumonia, an epidemic in terms of death rates. England saw 8,200 people die in 3 weeks, mostly the elderly. This year, we looked at 19 of 20 weeks, epidemic level, influenza-like illness, double pneumonia, and death. The CDC called it the flu. Most of the media we received called it the flu. I'm here tonight to tell you it was not the flu. In fact, many doctors were echoing the words of one nurse supervisor who said, "I don't think anyone knows what's causing this sickness." Doctors were saying this to the New York Times. And unlike flu that takes time to spread through a population, these illnesses were appearing virtually overnight in neighborhoods, communities, and cities, swamping hospital wards. And what the media never remarked on was that the incident of heavy spraying, the characteristic exit, the gel falling on parked cars and windshields and buildings, took place always at the same time, and within 24 to 48 hours, we saw these outbreaks of illness. Yes, some of it was the flu, but very little of it was influenza. The medical director for the Via Christi Regional Medical Center said, he told reporters, "This thing kills even healthy people in 4 to 5 days, and I have a stack of emails of aunts and uncles and family members who suddenly contracted pneumonia, although in good health, and were dead within a week." But when the WHO and the National Respiratory and Enteric Virus Surveillance Lab tested more than 18,000 people since last October, they found that 13% tested positive for influenza, the national average during an epidemic. In some areas, the peak, they tested 33% positive. Again, the national average was down around 13%. Reporters asked the CDC, "What is this?" And they said, "This illness could be due to some other pathogen." And when I looked at the heavy spray days by city, I again got an exact correlation. No, I do not have scientific proof, scientific evidence, but folks were way beyond coincidence here.
I'm Noam Chomsky. You're watching Working TV.
And as I followed leads from Mr. Wallace and started contacting people across the United States, I ran into meningitis outbreaks in the wake of this strain. This has been a rare inflammation of the brain and spinal cord, and comes on with flu-like symptoms, a skin rash, a stiff neck, severe headaches. And you know, we're still running into those symptoms after heavy spray days in schools and communities across North America. In Bell River, just outside of Windsor, there were 3 cases and 1 death among 3,000 people, and they vaccinated everyone. Multiple sclerosis started showing up. Chronic fatigue has been a major component linked to the spraying, as well as lupus outbreaks in Oklahoma, Kansas City, Florida, other locations in the wake of heavy spraying. And then this came up, transverse myelitis, something so rare, we rarely see it, and yet at the Cedars-Sinai Hospital in LA, 8 cases in 2 weeks. After heavy spraying there, hit people, pets, goats, other animals. So what do we have here? Well, we have a worsening epidemic over the past 2 years of a flu-like illness that has not been identified, a flu that is not the flu. We have, according to the CDC, an epidemic of death from influenza-like illness, pneumonia, and cardiac arrest. Now, since when is cardiac arrest a symptom of the flu? But that's what the CDC is reporting. And I've been a reporter and a columnist dealing with alternative health issues for years, and I have wondered at the sudden upsurge and predominance of autoimmune type diseases. We've just mentioned a few: chronic fatigue, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis. Virtually overnight in the past few decades. Yes, our immune systems are under increasing attack, but I believe we are under other attack as well. I got back in touch with Dr. Garth Nicholson, and he told me that now he believes that if we look behind chronic fatigue, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus, in many cases, we are going to find mycoplasma, because that's exactly what he is finding, and he's also finding brucellosis. Well, as Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again.